How's it going, YouTube? Komuchkin today with another video, and today, guys, what to bring to you is a lot of tips and tricks that you really need to know about Striker. Now, I could ask this question a ton, like, hey, are there any quick tips you can tell me? Are there things that I can learn real fast about Striker to do well? The thing about Striker is that it's probably one of the hardest decks to learn in all of Yu-Gi-Oh, and you can't really learn Striker overnight. It's going to take a long time before you learn every interaction. I've been playing this deck since release, and I'm still learning interactions. So this is really important to know, though, because you shouldn't be discouraged if you ever pick up the deck and you don't do that well right away with it. It's because you really need the time and the practice with it before you're going to be able to do well. So we're going to be talking about a lot of things that I really think about every single day when I'm playing this deck, and just different little things that I really throw into my gameplay to really enhance it. And so I really do hope that this is helpful for you. This video, again, is just going to be kind of branching off of the other videos I make about Striker already. If you haven't already seen my part 1 of this too, tips and tricks you need to know about Striker, also very important. That's just basically the foundation, the building blocks of Striker. And moving on to this, we're going to be talking about a lot more nuances. So I do hope that this does help you, because again, the deck, it does take a long time. It's kind of like when you're at a new job, right? You don't really learn every single thing about that job even in 2 weeks. It's because sometimes there's scenarios that just come up that you just kind of have to learn it on the fly, and there's no way that you're ever just going to be able to like be taught that right off the bat, right? Because even in Yu-Gi-Oh, every single situation is dynamic, especially with what deck you're playing against, and you really have to adapt to that. And that's why Striker is so great, because it has that power to adapt. So what I want to talk about now is that we play around Mech Knights even if we are not playing Mech Knights, or like playing against it. So what's really important about this, though, is when you go to play around a Mech Knight board, you would never put 2 cards in the same column. Even if you don't know what you're playing against at round 1 of a tourney, you still would never stack up your cards for the off chance that you're playing against Mech Knights. Why is this important to Striker? Well, if you look at like pendulums, for example, especially with the new support, we could be seeing a lot of pendulum players soon. And maybe with the ban list, since all the new support's coming, if Mike comes back, or like just randomly, you could play against pendulum. Not saying it's going to happen, but it could. And that's the same thing with Mech Knights. What I mean by this is that you can play around a lot easier on the pendulum boards with your Striker links as themselves. So basically what I see a lot of people do in this deck, which is just not the best, is they put their Kagari and their Shizuku pointing at a zone on the edge. You don't want to do this, because you can just point your links inward and point at the middle zone. Why this is important is because if you're playing against a deck like Pendulum, right? Like, they need zones to go off. So like, let's say there's someone like Beyond Pendulum, the new one, and it has 2 zones. It points here and it points here. They're already getting this zone. If you make your Shizuku and it's right here and it's pointing off here, they're going to have this zone, and this zone when they would only have these 2. And they would only be getting this one regardless. So to me, I really feel like you should be pointing your arrows inward. And it's, again, just something that you can do just to play around extra zones. Like, you just don't want to give them an additional zone. And it's something that a lot of people don't really think about, and that's fine. But this is something that, just hearing it, I hope that that does help you, because this is just something really simple that you can do to play around giving your opponent extra spots to summon, especially if you're randomly playing against the Pendulum matchup, right? So the next thing I want to dip into here is going to be, in the mirror, you really want to get to Roze first. That's really important, because if you're able to send Roze to the grave and then start your plays that way, you can go ahead and make cards like Burner, Jamming Waves into amazing top decks, especially if you don't have a link on board, because you can go ahead and go Jamming Waves, pop a back row, pop their link, and then summon Roze, negate their Ray, and shut off all their back row. Or you can top deck a Burner, pop their link, pop a back row, and then all of a sudden, again, shut down the Ray. So this is really, really important, because if you want to be able to grind with your opponent and use as least amount of Rays and as least amount of Kagaris and whatnot as possible, you need to rely heavier on your Roze and rely even heavier on your Shark Cannons versus your Widow Anchors and your Ray like we always have in the past. This is why I really enjoy this play, though, is because it gives you a lot of room to really play with your opponent and really make them kind of play the game first, because I almost would never throw my Rays in grave until I know that I'm grinding out with my Roze and I can really keep shutting down my opponent's back row through their Ray. And that's really important, honestly, just having the Roze so handy. The next thing here too is that people really need to utilize their Zeke more. And what I mean by this is that Zeke is much more than just a spot removable. Yes, you can use Zeke to go ahead and banish something. Yes, you can use Zeke to send something and gain attack and make it permanent. By the way, the attack gain is permanent. A lot of people don't know that. So it's really cool that you have that option. But what happens when you can actually use Zeke to be super defensive and set up the next turn board? Because let's say that you're in a situation where you're playing against like Invoke Shaddoll Dogmatica, right? And they have a Shaddoll Fusion in Graveyard, and you know that Shaddoll Fusion can just shut you out of the game. What you can do is you can make Zeke and you can banish their Winda. Winda doesn't go to grave, and they don't get to recur their Shaddoll Fusion, and then it comes back during their next end phase. By that time, like, you could already be super set up, and then they only have like the normal summon. And let's say that you only had a Chalice, so then that makes that Chalice super, super important because you can set it and then negate their normal summon, and then they don't even have this Shaddoll Fusion for follow-up because you banish the Winda instead of sending it to the grave. Very similar to Gazelle is that if you banish their Wolf, they can't summon Gazelle from their hand because it's only if a Salamangreat is sent to the graveyard. So you can use Zeke as much, much more than just a spot removal. I also really like, and left this example for last, in the mirror match, you can win very, very easily, and this is why. If you use Zeke and you banish their Link, it comes back at the end of their turn. What's so cool about that is they will set up all their back row. They'll forget about the fact that it's banished. They'll go multi-roll, set all their back row, and then their monster will resummon to their main monster zone, and all their back row is dead. So I think that's really important too. That's something that I really enjoy. This is especially against like the DPE decks that will use their DPE to clear itself to use their back row, and then they have the Shizuku that gets stuck there, and then now they have to clear the Shizuku and itself just to use their back row. So this is a very, very important interaction that you have to know in the deck because it's something that can really net you a lot of advantage and really curve the way the game's going to go. Again, being able to shut off that Doll Fusion at back, being able to shut off the Gazelle summon and the send off the Gazelle. Other cards work the same way where they have to go to grave instead, and this is something that you should really take advantage of. The next thing, make your cannons better. Make them better. Play cards like Chalice in your main deck. Really rely on your imperms. These are cards that are fantastic in the deck, and they're really, really underrated. I've even seen some decks already putting Chalice to like 2 or like cutting Chalice over other options. Chalice is so very good, and the reason being is that the number one deck that you're going to run into right now is Sword Soul, right? That's so very popular. What you can do against Sword Soul is so dirty. You can go ahead and summon their level 10 Synchro from the graveyard with your Shark Cannon and summon it to your board. This is insane because the second that they go to use any single banish effect, and you know that deck loves to banish, that you can go ahead and banish one from their field and their graveyard. And that means that your cannons are that much better if you have cards like Chalice and Imperm that aren't really disparaged by your main monster zone being full. So this is why I really enjoy Cannon when you're playing cards like Chalice and Imperm, is because you can go ahead and make these so much more effective. You can also use Shark Cannon in that matchup to go ahead and summon back their Baronne. And that's even crazier because you can pop a card in your turn. You can also have an Omni Negate at all costs, because like let's say that you don't have a way to put a negate on board, you don't have roll. If you add a Widow Anchor, it's not going to be usable until next turn, and next turn you might already be dead. So what you want to do is end phase add Shark Cannon and then reborn their Baron or reborn their level 10 Synchro, and then all of a sudden you're back in the game, and it's going to be really, really hard to out, especially if you're already playing Desires and you have level 10 Synchro on your board. That thing is going to be huge, and then your opponent's monsters, especially if you already have Shizuku, are like double on their attack is being reduced. So at that point, their monsters aren't very big at all, and it becomes very, very hard to out. And then generically, the level 10 Synchro, you're able to banish from your graveyard because it doesn't require you to banish worms, and so that makes the matchup really, really more dynamic, and I am a big fan of that. So that's something also just kind of keep in your mind and making sure that your cannons are a lot better, holding your anchors and setting your Chalice and Imperms when you go for a play like this. The next thing is you always want to hold an anchor in hand, because if you're playing against a deck that's comboing off, or even if they're able to put up one negate, right, you want to make sure that your top decks are more meaningful. So if I already have like a Ray in hand, right, I'm not really able to do much with that Ray against a negate on board unless I have like a Burner or a Widow. Now let's say I already have like Burner Ray, and you got a Shizuku add to get the Widow Anchor in the end phase, then all of a sudden your plays just got a lot more expanded, because let's say they put up like 2 negates. Then you can go ahead and go like Burner pop 1, and then go like they would chain negate or something. You go like Ray effect, they go negate. You go chain anchor, steal that monster, summon out your Kagari, add back anchor, or add back what have you. And now you have an additional monster on your board. You just play through 2 negates and you have 2 monsters. So there's a lot of usage in anchor and a lot of value in holding your anchor as long as possible. I always set my chalices, my imperm first. Like if you ever just have like a weird hand, you don't want to get lightning stormed, just like set an imperm or set a chalice, and then you can hold your anchors as long as possible, because the biggest payoff in Striker is always just going to be able to do the big chain link, right? Going anchor, shark cannon, hornet drone, or what have you. That's always the biggest payoff in Striker and the easiest way just to go for game. But holding your chainable pieces in hand for as long as you can is the basic way to win any game that you're against. And I've loved doing this. I've been doing this the entire time that I play the deck. It's something that I've seen a lot of people just kind of miss out on, or they don't understand like the big chain link, but that's usually the biggest thing that you can kind of work up to. And we're going to talk about why that is here in a minute. So right here. So you set the pace of the game, not your opponent. So if you're playing cards like Mystic Mind, right, then you're going to be able here to basically grind out the game with your opponent as long as you want it to. If you want the game to go a lot longer, then you can hold your anchors in your hand. You don't have to play aggressively. Like you can make sure that your opponent plays at your pace. And that really makes their deck play a lot like more odd too, because if you already have multi-roll and you're looping things like Widow Anchor and Shark Cannon, then your opponent really isn't able to do a whole lot during their turn. So you can kind of just stall out for a couple turns before you can actually go for the big kill. And that's perfectly okay. I think it's the next one. So Striker is so slow and gradual. Like you don't need to go for these big OTKs or these big closeouts. Like you don't need to close games out quickly. That's just not what the deck needs to do. You need to poke with Hayate a couple times. You need to steal a monster, do some poke damage. Keep setting up your game state until you're comfortable enough to just go for game. This is something that I see people mess up on so much. It's like actually ridiculous. Like people can Nibiru Striker. It does happen. And I've seen it happen to multiple Striker players. You have to make sure that you played all angles and you know what your opponent has. Because if you can read everything that they have, then it's safe to start playing. But if you just really slowly, gradually get them down, Hayate them like 3 times, put them down to that 35, that's when you're in the range that you really want to go for. I like putting them under 4K because at that point you can just go like Hita summon a Phoenix and go straight in access code for like 43. You don't have to commit a whole lot to it. You can go ahead and get the 4,300 damage across the board. If it gets stopped, then you still have your multi-roll, like your Widow Anchors, your Shark Cannons. There's ways to play around just getting bodied the next turn, or like getting hit by like a Nibiru, or getting Veilered on your access code so you can't kill. These are things you really have to think about, especially if you're playing against like Invoke Shaddoll Dogmatica and like you do this big play and you go for game, then all of a sudden they have like the flare that they throw in defense. These are things that you really have to have in your mind here. The next thing too, stop sending the engage off the Hayate. It's not that good, and I see people do this a lot, whereas there's really smart ways that you can do this. If you're going to use your Hayate, usually you'll want to send anchor. So what's really cool about this is when you are sending anchor, there's 2 lines of thought that you can have. 1, they have a negate, and if they don't stop the Kagari adding back the anchor, it's going to get negated anyway. 2, if they don't have a negate, and they have something in their hand they need to like get off in the next turn, and you're adding back the anchor, they need to stop you from adding back the anchor so that their normal summon can go through. If the anchor goes through, a lot of times you're just good to go. Like your Shizuku's going to go off. But if you're ever needing a card at the moment, a lot of times they'll let the anchor get resolved. They'll let it get added back by Kagari, which is really important to know. And then in the end phase, you can go ahead and add the engage, because like I said, you set the pace of the game. If you add that engage and you already are like going onto your spell count in graveyard, a lot of times your clap back the next turn is going to be immense, because you get to activate engage, then you get to add it back with Kagari, and then activate it again. You're gaining 4 cards, and your opponent is going inherently behind. So this is something where you have to make sure that you're getting engaged to your hand, and you don't want to lose to things like Imperm. You don't want to lose to things like Crow. You don't want to have to like really try to grind to get your engage back. You want to try to add it off your Shizuku, because for the follow-up turn, being able to use it twice is huge. And a lot of times, if you're going to go ahead and send it off Hayate and then go Hayate into Kagari add back, like if you don't even have spell count yet, there's no point to grab engage unless that's going to be the 3rd spell in the grave to make the card that you search live. Because if you're just like adding an anchor or adding a Shark Cannon or your roll, These are things that I would just rather add off the Hayate Kagari combo than my Shizuku, because usually, like, if you go through your whole turn, they're going to hand trap you wherever they want, and then your Shizuku will go through. So for me, I always just want to go for my engage off my Shizuku. The last thing, though, is that try to activate engage last. Now, a lot of people don't understand this one, and it's really, really important. If there's one thing that I give to you today, understand this. If you activate your engage last, I don't care if you're going first, if you're going second. So let's say, for example, if you're going second, right? You're going to go ahead, you're going to activate upstart. You're going to go ahead and go like multi-roll, and then go like Airy 0, and do like your Airy 0 send, or multi-roll send Airy 0 effect. And they go, that's fine. Okay. So you summon Ray, and then you summon like your Hayate, and you attack directly. You send that anchored, right? And then you go Kagari. They don't know that you already had the engage. So a lot of times there's two things that are going to happen. One, they're either going to imperm your Hayate because they don't want you to get engaged, and that's going to make them burn unnecessary hand traps that they didn't even know that they didn't have to. The other thing is that it makes it look like maybe you're trying to add it in the end phase, so you go Kagari and you try to add something back. They might negate that. And then you activate the engage after they hand trap everything that you've already done. And it's so detrimental because people will play as if you don't have engage. And what's super cool about that is when it's the last card that you activate, it's so devastating because your opponent, they played around it, they were making sure you didn't get it, they wasted everything they had, and then all of a sudden you have the engage, and then now it's just game time. And that's what I really enjoy about engage, and this is something that I really feel like if you learn anything today, it should be this. Try to activate engage last. Make it that last card in your hand. Play through their entire board, activate everything you have, but last activate engage. It will hurt so much more because your opponent will literally act as if you don't have it, right? And this is something that it just wins you games. And that's, if anything that I leave you today, that is that. Like, engage is crazy if you make it the last card that you can activate. Especially like with most hands that you'll see, you can at least try to play the game, right? Before you try to go for the engage. Because again, if you don't reveal it early, your Hayate always getting impermed, getting punishment, like whatever they have. Like, they're not going to let Hayate go off because they don't want you to get engaged. And then you have it. Oh, it's so good. So remember, if you're not already part of my community, go ahead and join my Discord. We're almost at 2,000 followers on Twitch. I'm like 9 people away or so. Definitely go over there, check it out. Go ahead and follow. We stream a lot. I'll be live Sunday, EST, 11 a.m. I'll see you there. I do a lot of remote duels against my viewers. If you want to catch a remote duel, definitely let me know. I'm always down. On Twitter, also, go ahead and follow me there. We're just trying to get the followers up so we can really start finding some sponsorships for the channel and really keep outreaching as much as possible and keep growing. Lastly, but not least, I have a Metafy page. If you want a lesson from Metafy, definitely go on there, see what I offer. If you want a customized session, please PM me on my Discord. Always feel free to do that. Never feel like you can't, especially if you just have questions, right, in general about the game. Feel free to PM me too. But we can go ahead and get yourself a session booked. I always love hearing what people need help with and really trying to help them be the best that they can in the game. So I do hope these tips helped you out today. These are things that I think about every single day when I'm playing the game. So I really do hope that they did help you though. And if they did, definitely leave a like, subscribe, comment down below what helped you the most, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Thank you.